Shalom. This is Rabbi Jonathan Ginsburg of the Ezra Abonim Now's Township Jewish Congregation. This week is actually a double Torah portion. We sometimes read two portions together. That's because there's 54 portions in the Torah, and in a non-leap year there's 48 weeks, and sometimes we have to combine them. This week there are the middle two portions of Leviticus called Achrei and Kedoshim. And I want to focus this week on Kedoshim because it's really one of these central passages in all of literature. In fact, everybody should memorize most of Leviticus 19. It's got some of the most amazing laws of religion and of philosophy. And the center of it is Leviticus 19:18. Everybody should for sure memorize these three simple words: Ahavta, raacha, camocha. Love thy neighbor as thyself. I remember a while ago a young fellow came to me and said, "Rabbi, how come we don't have any good verses like they have in the New Testament, like love thy neighbor as thyself?" Well, that was pretty funny since Jews had it first in Leviticus. In fact, if you read literature of any religion, just about, they have some version of that verse. And so we believe God emanates God's wisdom to everyone, not just the Jews. And so clearly, those three words, Ahavta, raacha, camocha, which means love thy neighbor as thyself, is something deep in God's center essence as a hope for us. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, the great sage Hillel in the Talmud, who was a contemporary of Jesus, was asked by a Gentile to explain all of Judaism standing on one foot. That's an expression that comes from that passage. Actually, there's manuscripts which show us that there's an additional letter, and if you add that letter, it means standing on one principle, which makes much more sense, but standing on one foot's a good idea. And what Hillel said to this fella is, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. All the rest is commentary. Go and study. I go to our nursery school on Fridays and talk about the Torah portion, and when it comes to this week, I always ask them to stand on one foot as long as they can and say, what you hate, don't do to anybody else. Standing on one foot, you can probably say that. Even a 4- and 5-year-old can say that. And that's really the essence of so much of wisdom. If you hate it, you know that your neighbor's going to hate it too. Don't do it to them, and then the world will be a much better place. It's just simply following that basic rule. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And so many cultures, as I mentioned, have this basic idea. Now, there's lots of times in Jewish life and in our regular lives where that issue comes to play. And one of the classic interpretations is, you have to love yourself, that verse suggests. You can't just be so self-effacing that in order to please everybody else, you deny yourself. So the verse has two parts. You have to love yourself, and you have to love your neighbor as yourself. You have to love you and your neighbor because both are made in God's image, you as well as your neighbor, so both have to be loved. Not the easiest thing to do, but definitely we need to have more in our world of not hating the stranger, but embracing the stranger, not persecuting the stranger, but treating everyone with one law alike. That's why the Torah is such a great document, the greatest document there is, because it teaches us dozens of times, in case we forget it the first few dozen, that there should be one law for Israelite and stranger alike, and God gets furious if we mistreat the stranger, the orphan and the widow. And so the word for this week, and should be the word for all of our lives, we should staple it to all of our material so we see it everywhere we look, is Ahavta, love, raacha, your neighbor, camocha, as yourself.